Good morning. 3 months ago, Canadians were shocked to learn of allegations of sexual misconduct leveled against the former Chief of Defence Staff and the cover-up that followed. Since then, there has been no accountability for the lack of action by this Liberal government. If the Prime Minister is telling the truth, and he wants Canadians to believe that he had no knowledge of an allegation of sexual misconduct brought with respect to Mr. Vance, he should fire his Chief of Staff. Si le Premier ministre dit la vérité, s'il veut que le Canadien croie qu'il ne savait rien d'une allégation d'inconduite sexuelle contre le général Vance, il va renvoyer sa chef du cabinet. Plusieurs fois, le Premier ministre et son gouvernement ont salué l'ancien chef d'État-major pour son travail sur l'inconduite sexuelle dans les forces armées. Et Mme Telford l'a laissé faire. The Prime Minister repeatedly commended the former Chief of Defence Staff for his work regarding sexual misconduct in the armed forces, and Ms. Telford let the Prime Minister do that. She knowingly let the Prime Minister suggest that General Vance was a champion for Operation Honour, when he was really an example of the kind of behaviour Operation Honour was trying to stamp out. Ms. Telford not only failed to inform the Prime Minister about a serious sexual misconduct allegation, she went on to orchestrate a cover-up to hide the truth from the Prime Minister and from Canadians. If the Prime Minister doesn't hold Ms. Telford to account, it will be an admission that he has not been truthful about his knowledge of the allegation of sexual misconduct brought to the Defence Ombudsman, and that the Prime Minister has been involved in the cover-up himself. Mme Telford n'a pas informé le Premier ministre des allégations d'inconduite sexuelle. Elle l'a même laissé dire que le général Vance était un champion de l'opération Honour. En réalité, il était l'exemple parfait du comportement que l'opération devait arrêter. Ensuite, elle a dissimulé la vérité aux Canadiens. Si le Premier ministre ne renvoie pas Mme Telford, cela va révéler qu'il a menti, qu'il a été complice de ce camouflage. Les conservateurs demandent au Premier ministre d'agir dans ce dossier. Il doit renvoyer sa chef du cabinet, point final. Il est temps de rendre des comptes et d'agir. Canada's Conservatives have tabled a motion in the House to ensure the lack of accountability on this important matter is dealt with. We are calling on the Prime Minister to take action and hold his Chief of Staff to account. The Defence Committee will continue its important inquiry as well. It is time for Mr. Trudeau to stop hiding the truth from Canadians and take responsibility for the actions within his own office who orchestrated this cover-up. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
And we'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Today, Mr. O'Toole will take 6 questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions, commençons par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel, une question suivie par journaliste. Aujourd'hui, M. O'Toole prendra 6 questions. Operator, do we have a first question?
Thank you. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile si vous avez une question. Our first question is from Rachel Gilmore from Global News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hey, Mr. O'Toole. I wanted to ask you about Friday's Defence Committee meeting. Obviously, the Liberal members of the committee ran up the clock on that meeting in what appeared to be an effort to derail the push to have Ms. Telford testify. If your party is unsuccessful in bringing her before the committee, what other options do you have to get to the bottom of who knew what and when they knew it about the allegations against General Vance?
Thank you, Rachel. You're right. The Liberals did filibuster at committee and are trying to block a reasonable inquiry into the origins of this cover-up. The Defence Committee will continue their work today. We will bring a motion to the floor of the House of Commons to debate this issue because Canadians deserve answers. The Prime Minister is saying he had no knowledge of a complaint brought 3 years ago, but we know from documents his entire office knew, including Ms. Telford. So she made a decision to either keep this from him or his description of his involvement isn't truthful. Either one of those options is troubling, so that's why we're going to keep mounting the pressure, and the Prime Minister must act so that he can show he doesn't tolerate such a cover-up.
And on a totally unrelated note, I wanted to ask you about the broadcasting bill. So experts are warning that the decision to strike Section 4.1 from that bill threatens Canadians' freedom of speech, and it creates the potential for the CRTC to regulate everything people post on their Facebook, YouTube, and other social media. I'm wondering what your reaction is to the Liberal decision to shut down the Conservative motion aimed at addressing that issue in committee on Friday, and what further action your party is planning to address your concerns about the bill.
Thank you. Canadians should be outraged by these changes made at the last minute by the Liberal government to fundamentally alter C10 and remove important protections for the liberty of freedom of expression for Canadians on social media. Why they did that, the Liberal government has still not answered. So the Conservatives are holding them to account. We want to have that section reinserted to provide protections for Canadians on their social media platforms. People expect to have that freedom of expression respected. We will also demand a confirmation that there was a charter compliance examination done when the Liberals changed their own bill. So we're going to push hard on this to stand up for that important freedom for Canadians.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question, notre prochaine question est de Hélène Buzetti, des Coop de l'information. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. Je voudrais moi aussi vous poser une question concernant C10. Je comprends que le risque théorique vous dérange, mais j'aimerais vous entendre. Pensez-vous vraiment que l'État va avoir le temps de se mettre à réglementer tous les vidéos mis par chaque citoyen sur les réseaux sociaux? Pensez-vous vraiment que la menace, elle est réelle?
Merci, Hélène. On doit protéger la liberté d'expression pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. C'est pourquoi on a des inquiétudes avec les changements par le gouvernement, avec le projet de loi C10. Les changements doivent respecter la Charte des droits canadiens et doivent respecter les libertés des Canadiens. Et c'est pourquoi on va continuer d'examiner, pousser pour l'échange.
Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ceux qui diraient que en tapant sur ce clou-là, vous faites peut-être le jeu de gens comme Maxime Bernier ou des conspirationnistes qui utilisent ce genre d'enjeu pour alimenter une certaine crainte à l'endroit de l'État, alimenter des théories là, de l'État Big Brother?
On a des questions raisonnables pour le gouvernement. Pourquoi les changements avec le projet de loi? Pourquoi une approche différente en ce qui concerne les réseaux sociaux pour les Canadiens avec C10? Le ministre Guilbeault doit parler sur ça parce qu'il y a des milliers de Canadiens avec des questions sur les changements et on va continuer de pousser pour une réponse claire par le gouvernement.
Operator, next question.
Notre prochaine question est de Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Je voudrais savoir ce que vous pensez de l'idée d'un passeport vaccinal pour voyager à l'étranger. Est-ce que vous êtes ouvert sur le principe? On sait que le Canada est en train de négocier avec ses alliés du G7 pour aller de l'avant avec ça. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de cette idée-là, de ce modèle-là?
On a besoin d'un approvisionnement suffisant de vaccins avant les voyages, les vols internationaux, avant les vacances. On a besoin des vaccins. Seulement 3% des Canadiens et Canadiennes ont reçu leur vaccin. C'est inacceptable. Après un niveau de vaccination approprié, on va avoir l'opportunité d'examiner un passeport vaccinal pour les voyages. Mais maintenant, on a besoin des vaccins. Right now, we need vaccines. We only have 3% of Canadians fully vaccinated. Now is not the time to be planning for international travel. It's time to get vaccines into arms. We We need that desperately. Once we have a level of vaccination that has Canadians safe, we've dealt with the third wave, we can look at safe and secure international travel.
Il y a des craintes vis-à-vis de la protection des renseignements personnels de la vie privée avec le modèle d'un passeport vaccinal ou d'un certificat de vaccination. Est-ce que vous partagez ces craintes-là? Est-ce que ça devrait être quoi les balises, selon vous, pour permettre l'utilisation d'un passeport comme celui-là?
C'est important pour le gouvernement fédéral de travailler avec les provinces sur ce sujet parce que traditionnellement, les cartes d'immunisation sont une chambre de compétences des provinces, mais les vols internationaux, c'est une compétence fédérale. C'est possible de travailler ensemble entre les niveaux du gouvernement, mais après les vaccinations des Canadiens et Canadiennes, avec seulement 3% maintenant, ce n'est pas le temps pour les voyages internationaux, c'est le temps pour les vaccinations.
We'll now take questions in the room. Rachel?
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. It's Rachel Haynes here from CTV National News. My first question today is about you're calling for Katie Telford to be fired. But a lot of victims who we've been speaking to are saying it doesn't really matter about who knew what, when, and this political back and forth because they want answers and solutions to the problems that they're facing in the military. So what does firing Katie Telford accomplish for victims who have come forward over the last few months?
Well, first, victims have to know that they'll be heard. And one came forward 3 years ago and was ignored. And in fact, Ms. Telford, it appears, orchestrated a cover-up of that to the point that the Prime Minister extended the contract of General Vance, gave him a bonus, and praised his work on Operation Honor when there was an outstanding allegation brought to the Ombudsman about the Chief of Defence Staff and this woman's concern about his role in Operation Honor. Victims, survivors need to know that they will be heard and respected. So that's why we're demanding accountability. A month ago, I asked for a very clear independent process to examine the allegations, to know that victims will have their complaints heard in a manner that's independent. I've also asked for a freeze for general officer promotions and salary increases. There's a crisis of confidence right now, and we have to show Canadians we will address it.
And when you're talking about a cover-up, over the past weekend question period, the Prime Minister had brought up that this is very similar to what happened in 2015 when you directed your Chief of Staff to bring forward rumors about Jonathan Vance, and then after an investigation, he was appointed anyways. How is what's happening now a cover-up, but what was in 2015 that happened not a cover-up?
Let's be perfectly clear. When I heard a rumor, I wanted that investigated to show that there would be zero tolerance taken to any impropriety with the Chief of Defence Staff. Mr. Trudeau's team, the Minister, Ms. Telford, were aware of a direct allegation brought by a victim. And what was done with that? Nothing. In fact, it was covered up and kept from the Prime Minister, from what he tells us. And the General was not only not reprimanded, they extended his contract and gave him a bonus. And the Prime Minister even praised his work on Operation Honor. So you wonder why victims feel disrespected and forgotten. It's because one followed the process, went to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman brought it to the Minister. It was discussed as sexual misconduct allegations. All the documents show it's sexual misconduct allegations. And the Prime Minister suggests that they didn't think it was a Me Too style complaint. That's hard to believe. So if he was kept in the dark for 3 years, he should hold his Chief of Staff accountable for that.
Prochaine question. David?
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Good to see you.
Morning, David.
You just said you were aware of rumors about General Jonathan Vance. Can you tell us what were those rumors that you were aware of?
As I've said many times, David, I was informed of a rumor of an inappropriate relationship amidst ranks. No names, no specifics to the allegations, but following the Deschamps report, I wanted complete assurance that there was no inappropriate conduct by someone we were going to be charging with dealing with the cultural issues raised by Judge Deschamps. Mr. Trudeau, I can't stress it enough, his minister, his chief of staff, the clerk of the Privy Council, everyone knew there were direct allegations brought by a woman in uniform regarding the Chief of Defence Staff. Not only was nothing done, it was covered up. They fired the ombudsman. And now I think the Prime Minister should fire his Chief of Staff for being involved in this for 3 years.
Didn't that rumor raise some alarm bells for you as well at that point in time? Wouldn't that have been enough maybe to consider someone else or maybe not move forward with it? What did you learn that satisfied you that Vance was still the right person for the top job in the military?
I was not involved in the decision on who was selected as Chief of Defence Staff. As I said, when I heard a rumor, I wanted it investigated because our men and women in uniform, particularly women coming forward to serve their country, to put their lives on the line, deserve to be able to trust leadership. And right now they can't. And let's draw the distinction here. I wasn't even directly involved, but heard a rumor and I wanted it acted upon. Mr. Trudeau's team knew about a direct allegation for 3 years. The minister keeps changing his language. The Prime Minister keeps changing his story. Miss Telford, it appears, set up a system to hide this from the Prime Minister and to make sure nothing was done. That is completely unacceptable, and it does contrast the style of leadership. I will hold people to account and actually lead when the Prime Minister, his own team, doesn't even brief him. I think Canadians should be disgusted by that.
And the last question, dernière question.
Mr. O'Toole, Liberthium, good to see you again. I
Howdy.
wanted to ask, you mentioned the motion that was tabled in the House. You have your opposition day tomorrow. Will you be using your opposition day motion to ask the House to support your call for the Prime Minister to fire Katie Telford?
Yes, we will, Lee. And we put it on notice last week, and we pursued our work through the Defence Committee. It is atrocious that literally at every stage, rather than answer some reasonable questions, rather than hold someone to account, the Prime Minister has his MPs filibuster and try and block an examination of questions that stem from a complainant, a victim who 3 years ago came forward through the process she thought was best served to raise this issue, this serious issue. She's been failed for 3 years, and we're going to fight for her and fight for change within the Canadian Armed Forces.
And I wanted to ask about the budget implementation bill that has now been released. Have you had a chance to go through it? Have you been briefed on it? And what are your thoughts on the legislation?
Well, as you know, the budget was a major letdown for Canadians. After 2 years of no budget, after all of the risks within the pandemic, the budget didn't deal with the issues of the pandemic, particularly working with the provinces on health, and actually spends in a way that is threatening the future prosperity of Canadians. So we will continue to examine the budget and the Implementation Act, hold the government to account on it, and propose alternatives to secure a future for Canadians. We launched our own recovery plan that we really think needs to be the focus of the country to make sure we lead in the economic recovery post-COVID. And those ideas we will be taking to Canadians in the coming months.
And this concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.